Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing well. In today's video, we're going to be talking about creating a new session in Pro Tools. What it is, how we navigate to it, what all the different parameters mean, the difference between a session and a project, and just kind of hopefully give you some insight into exactly what every single item on the new session prompt does. So let's jump into it. As you can see, we've got Pro Tools pulled up, but nothing is up. You may find yourself in the situation at some point. Nothing to worry about. If you ever get to this situation and you're unsure what to do to pull up that prompt, you can do two things. One of two things. You can go up to File, Create New, and that will pull up the new session prompt. Alternatively, you can use the keyboard shortcut, which on Windows is Control-N. On Mac, it is Command-N, and it pulls it up. So let's jump into the tabs first, and then we'll get a little bit deeper from there. Create, exactly what it sounds like. I want to go into Pro Tools and create a new session. This is the wizard I'm going to be using to do that. Recent will pull up a list of any recent sessions that you have worked on. I don't know exactly how it determines the time frame or if it's just a hard cap on a number of recent sessions, but 9 times out of 10, you'll be able to find what you're looking for here. We also have a list of projects here, which I should mention, you do have to be signed into your Avid account to access or to save to. You can see right up here is where you sign in and where you can see if you're signed in or not. The difference between a project and a session is simply where it's stored and how many people can access it. A session is intended to be stored locally on your device and accessed presumably just by you or whoever is using that machine, whereas a project is the same type of structure, but it's stored on the cloud and multiple people can access it to make changes to it. Very useful for collaboration. For what I personally do, I don't really have a need for it. Typically, I receive files or I record files. I do whatever I need to do to them, whether that's recording, engineering, mixing, and then when I'm done, I either send out a finalized recording or I send out a copy of a session to whomever to be able to access it and do their thing. But projects, very useful in a lot of situations. And last but not least on the side here, we have a Getting Started tab. This has a few cool things with it. There's some built-in kind of help guides with different functionality in Pro Tools. I'd highly recommend checking that out if you haven't already. A lot of cool things. There's a QRG there, some videos on getting started, some navigational prompts, so pretty cool. And then last but not least, under Getting Started, we have a few baked-in templates. One for beats, one for singer-songwriter, and for podcasting. We'll talk about what a template is later. I mean, it's more or less exactly what it sounds like. It is a pre-built session that should have everything you need to get started in a specific type of session. So we'll cover that in a moment. And then last, on the very bottom here, we have the Show on Startup selection. If you get into a situation like what we just saw where you've opened up Pro Tools, but this dashboard hasn't opened up, 9 times out of 10, that's going to be the culprit. Somehow that box got unchecked. And if we look just to the right of that, we see Open from Disk. So if the session you need to open is on your machine and it hasn't popped up in that recent tab, what we can do is click on that, and then it'll just pull up our normal File Explorer, and then we can find exactly the session we need from there. We'll hit cancel, and we'll go back into it. Finally, cancel, create, self-explanatory. No need to go over that. So let's go back up to the Create tab, and we'll walk through what each of these parameters mean. The name is going to be the name of your session. So for this, we'll just call it Audio Basics New Session. You have the option of making it a session or a project right from the onset here. We'll go with session. You have the option to create from a template, and you can see outside of the 3 selections we had for template, there's a whole lot more that you can select from here. You can select from music, post-production for film, video games, whatever you want. There's a lot of really awesome pre-built templates in here that you can reference. Also, you can make your own template based on your workflow, and we'll cover how to do that in a future video, but definitely don't shy away from templates. They're a very useful tool to be able to help you cut down on pre-production time by a pretty substantial margin. For the sake of what we're doing now, though, we won't use a template. We'll just create it from scratch. Now, going down to these bottom few selections here, this is really where we can get in and kind of choose, what the architecture of the session looks like. The first thing we have is file type. Pardon me. When you click on file type, you have two options. You have WAV and AIFF. What is the difference between those two? Not a whole lot, to tell you the truth. Both are uncompressed audio formats. That is to say, as compared to an MP3, for instance, where you have a piece of audio and then it's been compressed down to save space, which does sacrifice audio quality pretty substantially to varying degrees depending on what type of compression standard you're using. Both WAV and AIFF are uncompressed audio formats. So exactly what is being recorded is what is being stored. The difference in the two lies in the metadata and some of the other session information, or not session, but file information that gets stored along with those. I'll be honest, I've been doing this for about 15 years. I've never had a need to record an AIFF. You may have a need for it, but I'd say 99 times out of 100, if you're unsure, select WAV and you're going to be good to go. Sample rate. So sample rate is, actually before we jump into that, let's take a step back. So we are working in a digital system in Pro Tools. If you think of an analog system, that means there's no type of encoding going on, right? An analog signal, an analogous signal is, if a wave moves up and down, you can kind of see that picture in real time. The way we get that into a digital system is to essentially take snapshots. If you think of like a movie, for example, you're not capturing one fluid motion. What you're doing is taking a bunch of individual pictures, moving them fast enough, and then that gives the illusion of motion. Same thing in digital audio. What we do for frequency, which is the different pitches that we hear, is we sample the sound. And what sampling is essentially just taking a snapshot of what the amplitude and frequency, basically what the waveform looks like at any given point in time over a set amount of times per second. And the option of that set amount of times per second is what the sample rate is. So for instance, 44.1 kilohertz. That means every second, if you have this setting enabled, every second when you are recording, there are 44,100 snapshots of that waveform being taken in terms of frequency. The higher up you go, for instance, 48 kilohertz, that means 48,000 snapshots, all the way up to 192K, which is 192,000 snapshots of the sound per second. There's pros and cons to each one of these settings. In general, the lower you go in terms of sampling rates, the less fidelity you have. Gonna be real with you, 999 listeners out of 1,000 aren't going to be able to tell the difference in a finished product, and the one person that does say that they can tell a difference is probably just talking out of their ass anyway. But there's a few reasons why you want to have it be a specific frequency range at a bare minimum. Typically, you want to have your sampling rates be at least twice as high as whatever the highest frequency that you are recording is. And keeping in mind that humans typically have a range of hearing between 20 hertz as the very lowest pitch and 20 kilohertz, 20,000 hertz as the highest pitch. 44.1 kilohertz gives us just enough room to be above that that doubling. Okay, why do you want that to be doubled? Well, if you drop the sampling rate any lower than that, a lot of that really high frequency information can get artifacting, which is basically just unwanted noise, crackling kind of stuff that gets introduced into the signal. I will say I've recorded at 44.1, 48, 96, 192. I've gone down to 44.1 and I really haven't had any issues, even in recording like a drum set where there's a lot of high information there with cymbals. I typically haven't had any issue with artifacting, but the higher up you go, the more fidelity you're going to get out of that. So the con with that is the higher up you get, the more space it's going to take up on your hard drive. And that is 1-to-1. For instance, if you think of the difference in file size between 48 kilohertz versus 96 kilohertz, 96 being double of 48, it is going to take up twice as much space on your hard drive. So if you are doing, a few songs at a time, and that for whatever reason that level of fidelity is important to you, then by all means choose the highest sample rate that you can. I will say, even in most pro settings, typically the highest people are going to go is 96. More often than not, I see 48K being the standard. So all that to say, any of these should work for you. If you want, more hi-fi sound to begin with, you can go with 192. There are some limitations on hardware and interfaces in terms of how high they can go. But when in doubt, if you're not sure where to begin with, just select 48K. One other quick note on sample rates. If you are in a situation where the audio from your Pro Tools session and the audio from your computer are being routed to the same place, that is to say, if you just have a browser tab pulled up and you have YouTube up as a reference for a song, if you're trying to learn something and record it, I would try to personally stick to a multiple of 48 rather than a multiple of 44.1. I'm not 100% sure on this, but I have had issues previously where if I'm not in a multiple of 48K, 48, 96, 192, whatever have you, that Pro Tools will work fine. There's no artifacting, but when I go back and listen to something on YouTube while I have my session open, it's like a weird word clocking issue and you can get a lot of jittery audio. So if that's happened to you, try converting your session to a multiple of 48, and that may take care of the issue. I don't know that. That's just my personal experience. Anyways, onward to bit depth. Enough about sample rate. So bit depth, if you think about sample rate being a snapshot of the waveform at any point in time, that's going to tell us the frequency. Bit depth is going to give us the option for how much dynamic range, the louds and the soft that we have. And as you would assume logically, 16-bit gives us a smaller amount of dynamic range in terms of what can be sampled and captured than 24-bit or 32-bit float. The cool thing about this is it isn't necessarily, 1-to-1 in terms of hard drive space if you want to go with a higher quality. So if you want to go with 32-bit float, you absolutely can do that. Again, I think there are at times hardware limitations on what you can record at, but same thing here. I almost always record at 24-bit, and it does exactly what I need it to do. I've never really had any issues with noise or artifacting, so pretty convenient. So we'll leave it at 48K, 24-bit wave. Interleaved. What does interleaved mean? For this, and we'll talk about interleaved and bouncing in a separate video, but when you have the interleave box selected, stereo channels are going to record as a stereo file rather than multiple mono. Helpful for organization, not the end of the world if you don't have this checked. I'll be honest, I typically don't have it checked. I probably should. I'm sure there's a good reason to leave it checked, but same thing. If you're unsure of what to do, you can leave it unchecked and you'll be fine. I/O settings. A lot of cool stuff you can do with this. I/O is the settings that Pro Tools has saved to be able to bring sound in, the I, and send audio out, the O. By default, last used is probably what's going to be checked, and if it's your very first session, what you'll probably have to do is leave last used set up and then go into your playback engine and I/O setting in a session, get everything configured, save it, and then you're good to go. But there's a lot of cool things you can do here. It has some built-in templates for different mixing situations, stereo 5.1. And what's really cool is if you're using an Avid brand controller or interface, it gives you some options to have that I/O set up already. For instance, the 11 rack, which is a guitar simulator rack that has different amps, effects, and everything, that's an Avid product. So if you were to own that rack and plug it in via USB to your computer and open up Pro Tools, you could just select that from your I/O settings, and everything theoretically should be plug and play and you don't have to worry about it. So there's stuff for the C24, which is one of their control surfaces. There's the Icon, which is a live audio desk that they make. So pretty handy, but again, if you're unsure, leave it in last used, and then if you have to make changes, go into your I/O and playback engine settings within the session and go from there. Finally, we have the information for saving this. You can have it set up as prompt for location, or you can choose where that location is preemptively. So what I do is I leave it as the location being set up preemptively. I've got a solid state drive set up with my computer via USB-C, which is fast enough to be able to read and write simultaneously. That means I can record audio to it with no issues, and I can hear that audio back right off the hard drive with no issues. That didn't used to be the case. It used to be if you were using an external drive, or an internal drive for that matter, that was an HDD, if you didn't have a fast enough RPM, you would run into some pretty substantial latency issues. Thankfully, with SSD and most things being on that now, that's not a huge issue. So as long as you have a solid state drive as what you're recording to, you should be fine. I would highly encourage you to use the second setting here and just keep all of your sessions in one place. That really helps for organization. But again, it's your session. You do you. And that's really all of the different categories we have here. If we hit create, it'll pull up a new mix and edit window once it's populated everything, and then we're good to go. So we'll talk about bringing in new audio tracks, instrument tracks, master tracks, how to get all that set up in a future video. But we'll end this video here for right now. Hope you found this helpful. If you have any requests for future videos, feel free to call it out in the comments. Other than that, have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.